Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are diving into one of the most anticipated sections of A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas, the infamous High Lords meeting. You know, the gathering that was supposed to be about saving Prythian, but somehow turns into the fantasy equivalent of a family reunion where everyone has centuries-old grudges, burned romantic partners, and absolutely no interest in being the better person. These chapters have everything: the political drama, long awaited confrontations, sharp one liners, shocking reveals, even more wingspans, and enough tension to make us wonder if they're going to negotiate or just start throwing magic at each other. So go grab your tea before Mor and Vivienne spill it. Tighten your Illyrian leathers to ward against Tamlin's sharp tongue, and join us as we break down every argument, alliance, and perfectly timed comeback before Helion makes our toes curl in our slippers. Let's head back to Prythian and see if we can survive the High Lords meeting together. Chapter 39 through 46. So we've just come back from a battle in Adriata in the Summer Court. That is where Hybern has striked next. They landed their ships in the Spring Court and then just kind of sailed right up to the Summer Court on that western border. Thankfully, Varian, the Prince of Adriata, got a message over to Amren, and she warned the Night Court. They came to help, and that's where we ended. Our last set of chapters was with the Night Court ending their little battle in Adriata. They have now camped in the hills of Adriata just for the night, just to get the wounded to a point where either they are going to die or to a point where they're healed enough that they can move them. I think it's interesting how everybody kind of fits into the camp after the battle has taken place. Feyre is observing everyone. She's not quite sure what to do because this is the first battle she's really been in where she actually had to be a part of a war camp set up afterwards, because all the other battles they helped repair and then they went back to the townhouse. So this is a little bit new for her. She mentioned she's barely seen Azrael. He's had spies set up all over the place, bringing information in to himself, to Cassian and Rhys. Hybern has actually retreated all the way back to Hybern, not even just to the Springport court, but back to Hybern. No whisper of Jurian or Tamlin. Neither have been mentioned. Cassian is limping through the war camp. He's acting like the general. He's talking to multiple different soldiers, most of them by name, just to kind of bolster them through the night. Mor is also helping out. Feyre does mention that both Mor and Cassian's eyes are a little glazed over, just like hers, because of everything that happened in the battle. This is the aftermath of the battle, whereas Rhysand's are clear. He is the epitome of the High Lord right now. He is alert. He's grim, but he is going through the camps as well, looking at the soldiers, making sure everything is as it should be, talking to different people, but he's also kind of exuding a confidence that, yes, they lost some and some are injured, but they did win the battle. And Feyre mentions that she felt like some of them were looking to her to be the High Lady and kind of be similar to Rhysand, and it wasn't something she was able to muster at this point, the ease with which Rhysand is going through the camp. So instead, she is just determined to help in every way that she can in regards to helping the healers heal as many wounded as she can, until she actually face plants into the mud because she sits down for a minute and falls asleep and just falls forward. So Rhys puts her to bed so she can actually get some sleep. And we get some instances where Feyre is kind of discussing with Rhysand or thinking through her feelings, what she's feeling in regards to the battle, because this is the first official one where she actually had to work with other soldiers or work with someone closely, like she did fighting with Mor. She does say she's still kind of figuring out how to feel about it, and Rhys says open war is like that. It takes a while for you to decide how to deal with everything that it brings and all of the cost. She finds out that Cassian is the one who will talk to the families of those who died. If he knew them, that he'll go to their house after they go back. So tomorrow, he's going to go to each one of their houses to let their families know. And they do kind of discuss that the King of Hybern knows their histories. He knows them very well. Now he knows about Valaris. He's attacked that. He knows about the things that Rhysand holds dear. He knows about Nesda and Feyre's feelings for her. So he is kind of going after the things that they care about most. And we're going to see it a couple times throughout these chapters that because their enemy already knows everything about them, then when they go to meet with the High Lords, they actually choose to show their true faces to the other High Lords, thinking our enemy already knows who we really are. So our friends or those who we want to be allies might as well know who we are as well. So because of this attack on Adriata, they realize that they cannot fight against Hybern alone. They need to bring allies. They need to bring the High Lords of Prythian together, and as we know, they need other allies outside of that. So they are going to bring the meeting with the High Lords sooner so that they can go and talk to them because the war has already started. Now it's just a matter of when will the next battle be. They do decide that although they're going to show the other High Lords their true faces, they're going to remove the masks that they've worn in the past. They do decide that Feyre's magic, the magic that she received from those High Lords, is the one thing they're going to keep secret. Doesn't end up happening, but they go into it trying.
I think it was kind of telling that Feyre was immediately like, hey, not just, it didn't seem like she was just asking, hey, how should I act so she knew? But she was thinking of that as that High Lady. You start seeing her right before the meeting, which I thought was interesting. She starts shifting into more of that mindset than we've seen before, where she's like, okay, I've got to focus. Because I feel like that kind of trickled
Right.
down to Nesta too. And, just kind of brings it there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think we've seen little bits of her stepping into that High Lady position, and it's just growing. She is growing more into that position. We do find out as they're talking about whether or not they should keep Feyre's powers hidden. As Rhys's High Lady, she would have received some powers from him. So they are going to keep all other powers except for those, presumably, powers she would have received from him, which I think is interesting that the High Lady would receive additional powers when she became High Lady. We don't really ever get it spoken of, other than this little bit.
Would that mean that the others, like Tamlin, where he said there's no such thing as a High Lady, is it that there just never has been before because of that? I mean, because we see a lot of traditional male figures as the lords. So
Yeah,
is it sometimes the thought of them not wanting to share their magic, do you think? Not
right?
wanting to
Because
dilute their power?
we do get that a little bit at the High Lord meeting after Feyre uses her powers and they all realize that they had some part of their magic taken or given to her. And that's some of them, like Baron, even Thiessen, think that if Rhysand wasn't in the picture, they'd probably try and take that power away from her, take it back. They probably didn't want to give up any of that power. They wanted to keep it all for themselves. So because of that, they never allowed one of their wives or consorts to become a High Lady. I don't know,
Which is interesting because Rhys always had the intention to have an equal by his
right?
side, if and when that time ever came.
And Rhys
So it's
even
just,
talks about his sister. If she had lived, he was pretty sure she would have been the one to rule and not him. Or is it because he would have stepped aside and let her rule? We don't know for sure because she dies too young. But he does mention it in the last book that she would have been the one to rule and be a High Lady. I don't know. I just find it interesting. We will see. Okay. So the next morning, they make it through the night with very few warriors dying as far as the Illyrians. There are quite a few for the summer court, though, that do die because their forces were hit more than the Illyrians. They finally go back to the townhouse, and we see Nesda a little concerned about Cassian. So we see their relationship growing a little bit more. She doesn't want to tell anybody about it or allude to it. Azriel and Cassian have gone with the Illyrian so that Cassian can talk to the families of those who died. So he is not with them at the townhouse. So when Feyre and Rhys come back, Nesda immediately asks, "Where is he?" And Rhys's response is, "Well, who, Nesda? Who could you possibly mean?" You know exactly who she means. Rhys, "Oh yeah, he's just being a butt." And her response is Cassian. And Feyre is like, I don't think I have ever actually heard his name on her lips. She always just calls him or that one. And Mor is there as well. Her response is to essentially cut Nesda off and just say, "He's busy." That's it. Sharp, icy. And Nesda just holds Mor's stare, and then Mor gives her a talking to, stern, sisterly kind of remark. When he gets back, keep your forked tongue behind your teeth. And people don't really give Nesda warnings like that to that extent because it's Nesda and she's scary. But Mor is not having it right now, not after everything that they just went through. She does not want Cassian to have to deal with Nesda. But Nesda still struggles because she doesn't know where Cassian is or what he's doing. Rhys, at the very least, tells them that Cassian and Azriel are both fine. But it is still bugging Nesda, so it's pulling her concentration away from working with Amren. And Amren finally says, "Cassian has gone to war many times. He isn't the general of Rhys's armies for nothing. He's probably talking to the families of those who died. He'll be back before the meeting. Get back to your training."
Listening to Nesda this time around, hearing her comebacks, I guess, the "I don't care" and things like that had me laughing out loud this time around. The first time I was like, oh, she's mean. I don't really like her. But this time you can understand where it's coming from, and it's just funny to listen to her reactions to people.
Yeah. I love her. Or when we get to the High Lord meeting, I love her throughout the whole meeting.
Yeah.
See, this is where I fell in love with her before her book. So, she reminds me, like I said, she's the character that I feel like I have that soul tied to if there's one of the female main characters that I have, or female large characters that I have to focus on. But yeah, the snark, the leveling, I was reading it before bed and I was like, okay, well now I'm not going to stop reading because yay.
Right?
Later on, I don't remember who she was talking to. I can't remember. She says that again. "I don't care." Who is it?
Helion. It's that later that night, which we'll probably get in next episode.
Yeah.
But yes, Helion is super interested.
Care.
Goes to introduce himself. Yeah. She cuts him off. And he is shocked that anyone would cut him off because he's definitely coming on to her too, which I just love Helion. We'll get to him. Yes, I agree.
Got him. I forgot certain details.
How could you forget Helion? I mean, come on.
I mean, remember, I read the first book and then didn't stop for a month and a half. So, yeah,
She's
amazing.
That's too funny. Feyre decides that they need to go to the bone carver immediately. There is not a whole lot that happens, but Feyre is essentially going there to ask him if there is anything else they can give him in exchange for him fighting for them, because she does not want to risk getting the Ouroboros mirror. But I think it's really funny, I underline this to point out, is that they are both still, they haven't showered or bathed or changed since the battle, so they are both still bloodied. And I love that Rhys stays out in the hall for a minute while Feyre is talking to the bone carver, and eventually Rhys does come in. The bone carver just gives him a once over and is like, "I like you much better all bloodied." It just cracks me up. And Feyre again says, pick something else for me to give you. What else do you want? And the bone carver's response is, well, what would you give me? And then he says, what about your firstborn? Hint, hint. And then just like waves his hand over his body. And Rhysand is shocked because this is something Feyre didn't tell him. He knew in book 2, when they first go to the prison, that what Feyre sees is a small boy. And we kind of get the sense that Rhysand might think that it's their son or could be their son at that point. But even after she goes a couple of chapters ago with Cassian and sees the boy again and knows at that point that it's her and Rhysand's son, she still doesn't tell Rhysand because so many other things happen. But finally, he is surprised at what the bone carver has said and says down their bond, so not just any boy. And she says, no, not just any boy. And the bone carver is like, it's rude, majesties, to speak when no one can hear you. Which I feel like this is something we're going to get a little bit of throughout these couple of chapters, is Rhysand and Feyre talking mind to mind, and it just annoying everybody else in the room. Which I feel like that harks back to Aelin and Rowan after they're together, because they annoy everyone because they have these silent conversations with each other. So similar, and I love it. So the bone carver does say that is the only thing that he wants is the Ouroboros. And so they leave, like I said, super, super quick trip. Rhys and Feyre make it back to the townhouse. At that point, they have not eaten anything since the day before. So they're both very hungry. They go into the kitchen to actually get food directly from the kitchen instead of waiting for it to be made, and come to a halt because Elaine is in there with Nuala and Caradwyn, and they're making bread, which is a huge turnaround for Elaine. She has actually left her room, hasn't gone to the garden, and she is hungry and asking to learn, which I pointed out because it specifically says Nuala tells them that the lady was hungry, so we went to make her something, but she asked to learn how. And we talked about in the first book that Elaine didn't even help with the cooking when they were starving. Like Feyre and her dad pretty much did all of it. So it's nice that one, Elaine is finally learning how to do some of it, but two, that she's coming out of her past trauma enough to be able to do something other than just sit around or garden. And I love that after Rhysand and Feyre go up to their room, Rhysand says, the feeling that you have right now is how I felt in that first dinner that we had by the Sidra when you said the food made you feel alive. So I love that we're getting a little bit of a comparison there, that Rhys felt very similarly when Feyre finally overcame or was starting to overcome some things and coming out of her trauma. And now we're seeing Elaine doing that as well. Feyre has a little discussion with Nesda at the end of this chapter. Nesda says, you're going to the meeting in 2 days. Feyre says, yes. Nesda says, and you went off to battle without a second thought. Why? Feyre says, because I had to, because people needed help. And that was it. That's all the conversation is, but it means so much more to Nesda because it actually pushes her to do a little bit more in the next chapter. So the next couple of days, they're super busy deciding exactly where they're going to have the High Lords meeting, getting everything done prior to that, squeezing in some training as much as they can. Amren at this point has said that it should only take Nesda a couple more days until she is able to use whatever mysterious power she has to start repairing the wall, or at least be able to do something. Amren had found a promising part in the Book of Breathings, a passage that she thinks is going to be beneficial in helping Nesda repair the holes in the wall. So she's close to finishing that up. Amren is leaving, going back to her apartment so she can scour that book and attempt to decode that specific chapter. Amren is staying in Valaris while the rest of them go to the High Lord meeting. Amren will stay with Elaine. Initially, she was going to stay with Nesda as well, but we find out in a minute that Nesda has actually chosen to go with them. And I love that we get a little bit of a description on what everybody is wearing for this, because we talked about they want their masks off. They want to be themselves. So Rhys is still in his black because that's Rhys's signature look. He's still in black, but he has his wings out and he's going to keep them out through the meeting. Cassian and Azriel are in their Illyrian armor, which is not surprising whatsoever. It's kind of what they were all the time. Mor is not in red, but she is in a midnight blue gown that is still pretty much as revealing as her red ones are. She's just selected a different color. So it's still very similar to what she usually wears. Feyre describes her as being more restrained and regal in this dress, a princess of the realm. In her dress, she actually took her Nightfall dress and they adjusted it a little bit. So it is still the glittering material, very similar to woven starlight, but now she has like a cape behind her that's attached to the dress that is also a glittering material. And Feyre says, if Rhys was night triumphant, then I was the stars who only glowed thanks to his darkness, which I love because then she describes him as night triumphant and herself as the stars eternal. And so she and Mor and Cassian are all waiting in the foyer for Rhys to come down. And I love this little interaction because Cassian is just looking at Feyre multiple times, hasn't said anything. Feyre is finally like, what? What are you looking at? And he's like, you just look so... And then Mor's response is, here we go. And Cassian says, official and fancy. Those are the words that he uses to describe Feyre right now. And Mor says, over 500 years old, a skilled warrior and general, famous throughout territories, and complimenting the ladies is still something he finds next to impossible. It just makes me laugh so much. And Azriel is just chuckling in the corner. And Cassian then, of course, shoots a glare at him. Well, I don't see you sprouting pretty poetry out to the females. And Azriel's just like, oh, well, I don't need to. Because he has that confidence, and it cracks me up. And then Rhys finally decides to slowly come down the steps and essentially stare at Feyre the entire time he's walking down the steps, specifically the crown that is on her head. And she gives us a couple, extra pages of the crown that she's wearing and how it is different from usual. In the past, Rhysand has crowned her, either given certain crowns to Nuala and Caradwyn when they're dressing her, or he is selecting the crown specifically for her. Very few times has she selected a crown for herself, except for this instance. So we find out that Rhys had actually taken her prior to this into a space right above the library in the House of Wind, where the family jewels are. And he says some of the pieces we don't like we keep in the Court of Nightmares, because if we don't, then they get upset about it, and sometimes we loan them to Mor's family. But all of these are for the family, as in himself and Feyre, and then any offspring that they might have. And I love that we kind of see this through a merchant's daughter's eyes, and she even mentions it herself, that as a merchant's daughter, she struggled to put a value on most of the pieces in this room. As they're in this like cavern room under a mountain that is obviously it's super dark. And Feyre realizes that it isn't like fey balls of light that are on the ceiling lighting the space. It is actually glowworms. And she describes them as in each nook where all of the jewels are, because each of the crowns have little nooks. She said they seem to glitter like the eternal night sky, pale blue and turquoise. Their light as silken as moonlight, illuminating the jewels with their ancient, silent fire. Where else have we heard mention of glowworms? After they rescue Aelin from Maeve, and they are needing to get across Wendlin without dealing with Maeve, they end up going down into a cavern and actually sail on a little boat through the waters in a cavern. And there are multiple days in this cavern. And at one point, Aelin opens her eyes overhead, clinging to the cavern ceiling as if they were stars trapped beneath the rock. Small blue lights glowed, glowworms like those in the lanterns, thousands of them, made infinite by the reflection of the black water, stars above and below. And she describes it as a sea of stars. That's what the cave had become. Stars could still glow, still burn bright. And it is a blue light, which is exactly how Feyre describes them, as a blue turquoise. So we now have the same animal in 2 of our series, but it makes me wonder, so much makes me wonder. Rhysand does tell Feyre to choose a crown, select which crown you choose to wear. And I love the way Feyre describes how she chooses the crown. She says, I let it call to me. I hadn't picked it for style or comfort, but for the draw I felt to it, as if it were that ring in the weaver's cottage. And so she gives us a little description of this crown. Crafted of silver and diamond, all fashioned into swirls of stars and various phases of the moon. Its arching apex aloft a crescent moon of solid diamond, flanked by 2 exploding stars. So there are some crowns in Throne of Glass that we get very minimal descriptions of. One of them is the Kraken crown of the witches that Manon wears, and it is a crown of stars. Doesn't say anything about a moon being on it, but it is a crown of stars. And then Mab's crown, which is the Fairy Queen's crown, doesn't actually describe what the crown looks like, just that it glows like the moon, which makes me wonder if any of the crowns are the same. We don't know for sure. But it made me think about it and go back and look while I was reading to see if they were or not. So I'm not convinced that they aren't different. I'm curious because I saw a theory the other day, just as far as there's theory that there's a timeline, which we've talked about before, that different series is part of a different timeline, but this is a different way of looking at it, and I'm starting to see it. So we'll come back to it.
Hey, when we do, you'll have to remind me because now I'm curious if it's something that I've seen. So I saw something on the timelines of each world too, and I
That
kind of was going
ACOWAR
back
is
and forth with
first.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was thinking on it as well because of the plumbing listed and mentioned in Throne of Glass, the descriptions of it being more frequently listed as the hot water flowing.
So
and
does your
stuff like
theory
that
say Throne of Glass came first or after?
after ACOWAR, the one that I had seen. There were like 2 or 3 reels that I went through that had different ties. And then I stopped them all as I started talking Crescent City, other than, hey, it's the future, because I didn't want to have any spoilers because I feel like my mind's going to be blown enough going back through the first book.
So yes and no. I'll tell you the first part of the theory is that ACOWAR comes first. That the cauldron making the world is making one world, and the ACOWAR family, the ACOWAR people come first. Throne of Glass is not second, though.
Interesting.
So that's where we got to get through Crescent City before we can talk about how that's possible.
Yeah, because that would confuse me, but okay.
Right? But interesting, because even if that is the case, like if Throne of Glass were to come after ACOWAR, this whole scene where we have them in a cave, a cavern, in a mountain, in a country where there is water on one side, not water on the other side, but we don't know how big Wendelin is and Maeve's realm. Like, we just see a chunk of it. We don't know how wide the continent is. So what if it is the same as Prythian? And we actually, the cave that Rhys and Feyre are in right now getting the jewels is the cave that Aelin travel through, because they talk about how much, all the gold and the jewels that are in it. I mean, opened into a small cavern, and gold gleamed, gold all around. There is a sarcophagus in the center, so maybe it is just a tomb in Throne of Glass.
Yeah, but a world that had been in ruins and rebuilt could have had a sarcophagus in a
Right?
cavern as well. And that could be part that's not written yet that we don't see that could tie it together further. All right, we gotta keep reading because, like, I need to get into Crescent City, like, right now.
Okay. So Feyre has selected her crown. Rhys very much enjoys the crown that she selected for herself, does tell her through the bond that he would like her to wear that later and to be the only thing that she wears because he likes the crown that much. But I love that right before they leave, they're about to winnow out, and Nesda actually comes down the steps because she's decided to go with them. And I love that she gets to the bottom of the steps and tells Feyre, "You look beautiful," which Feyre is shocked because Nesda's never shown anything like that affection to her. And Mor's response is, "That, Cassian, is what you were attempting to say." And so Nesda says that I don't want to be remembered as a coward. That's why I'm going to go with you, because Feyre had asked her a couple chapters ago if Nesda would go and explain her story to the High Lords in an attempt to get them to align with the Night Court. And Feyre says no one's going to think you're a coward. Nesda says I would. War was some distant thing, but it's not anymore. I will help if I can, if it means telling them what happened. Feyre says, well, you've given enough already. You don't need to give more. You're close to figuring out how to shut the holes in the wall. And Nesda says, a day or two won't delay me, which that's not really the case, but we'll get there. She says, you went off to battle for a court you barely know, who barely see you as friends. Amryn showed me the blood ruby, and when I asked you why, you said because it was the right thing. People needed help. No one is going to fight to save the humans beneath the wall. No one cares, but I do. And that's when Rhys says, well, Feyre used to be my emissary to the humans, but she isn't anymore since she's my High Lady. Do you want the job? And we'll consider this a trial run, and you're going to pay out the butt for my services. Which, yes, when we get to Nesda's book, she does rack up some major charges. But Rhys's response is, well, of course, I wouldn't expect anything else from an Archeron system. And so Rhys says, welcome to the court. You're about to have one heck of a first day. Rhys has his wings out, and Cassian snipes at him a little bit and says, well, there's no going back now. And Rhys says, well, I figured it's time for the world to know who really has the largest wingspan, because it's always a competition. They do start betting on how quickly a fight is going to break out in the High Lords meeting. Cassian starts it, then Mor jumps in. Asriel agrees. And I love it, because Cassian says 20 gold marks, there's a fight within the first hour. Mor says 30, and I say within 45 minutes. Asriel says 50, and I say within 30 minutes, and it started by autumn. And Rhys says, try not to look like we're gambling on them, and no cheating by provoking fight, which isn't going to stop any of them. And then Rhys adds, and 100 marks on a fight within 15 minutes. And they all look to Feyre to see if she's going to bet as well. And she just says, well, Rhys and I are a team. He can gamble away all of our money on this BS. And Rhys starts to say, a queen in appearance only. And Feyre stops him. Don't even finish. So they go to winnow away, and Rhys is going to winnow Feyre, and then Mor is going to take Cassian and Nesda, and Asriel will winnow himself. So Asriel winnows away first to check to make sure everything is good, and then they get the all clear. Rhys is just about to winnow Feyre when we have a little interesting interaction between Cassian and Nesda that stops Rhys and Feyre from winnowing because they're both busybodies and they want to hear what's going to happen. But I love it because Cassian walks up to Nesda and growls, hello, Nesda, which to me, this is like the equivalent of Rhys saying, hello, Feyre, darling. Same thing in this instant. And Nesda's response is, so you're alive? Cassian says, well, yeah, were you hoping otherwise? And she starts to say, you didn't come to. and then cuts herself off. And this is when Cassian realizes that she was worried for him because he didn't come back after the battle. And so he does say, next time, emissary, I will come and say hello. And through this whole encounter, Feyre and Rhys are watching them, and they're also watching Mor, who is watching Nesda and Cassian. And she watches as Cassian actually takes Nesda's hand, interlocks their fingers, folds his wings in, and then blindly reaches back for Mor in a silent order to transport them. So, like, he's essentially put Nesda in front of him and Mor behind him. And Nesda and Cassian stay eyes locked together until they winnow to the High Lord meeting. So we start to see them and their relationship unfold a little bit more. So they do winnow to the Dawn Court. That is where they are holding the meeting. It is Thisne who has agreed to host the High Lord meeting. Feyre says she's seen the clouds first because this is essentially a castle in the clouds. It's built high enough that the tops of it are actually going up into the clouds. And I pointed this out because I don't know if it's just the wording or if it's an actual difference, because Feyre is standing in the foyer while the clock on the sitting room mantel struck 11. So I'm assuming that's 11 in the morning. But then they winnow to the Dawn Court, and Feyre says the clouds were still tinged by the rose remnants of sunrise, their round edges gilded with golden light, and the dewy freshness of morning lingered in the balmy air. Does that mean they're in like different time zones? Like, did we go back a couple of hours?
Interesting.
Because we get somewhere in past books where Rhysand is talking about the solar versus seasonal courts, and that the solar courts actually adhere to the normal seasons and a normal day. So we know that it isn't dawn all day long because this is the Dawn Court, just like it isn't night all day long, like you would think in the Night Court. So this passage kind of leads me to believe that there is a time zone difference that isn't actually talked about in any of the books. I don't know for
And
sure.
there's more that might support it because we're at the 11 o'clock as they're getting up in the previous chapter. She also mentions that she didn't sleep through the night, but then dawn broke, and as she dressed, the morning unfurled into a sunny, dry day. So that she clearly, I didn't catch that.
So it's sunny and dry and 11 o'clock in the morning when they leave the Night Court, but now it's just after sunrise or in the Dawn Court.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just a typo.
But what if it's just the different courts, though? Because it may be, if it's drier there, though, it could be more balmy here in the Dawn Court, and it just be a different kind of atmosphere. So it makes it seem...
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we're a half hour apart and it can be raining here and not raining there. But I just mean because it was 11 when they left the Night Court, and then this wording sounds like it's dawn or right after dawn when they make it to the Dawn Court.
Definitely
like, it's not
something I didn't see. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just the weather that's different. It sounds like the time is slightly different. But I don't know for sure. The palace is opalescent golden stone. So she compares it to the palace above the Night Court that had been crafted of moonstone, whereas this one had been crafted of sunstone. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on what it looks like, but it is a very beautiful palace. Like I said, up in the clouds, lots of spirals and turrets and balconies all over the place, which is similar to what we saw when we were in Adriat. And they get there, and Helion, Callias, and Thesan are already there. So the Lords of Day, Winter, and the host, obviously, Dawn. Meaning Autumn and Summer, Baron and Tarquin, had not arrived, and Tamlin from Springcourt obviously hasn't arrived yet either. So they do step in. Rhys says, mind to mind, shields up. They all have their shields up to protect them. And I love the last little bit of info that we get in their mind-to-mind bond. As Feyre saying, I see all of you, and there is not one part of you that I do not love with everything that I am. And Rhys's response is, you bow to no one. Which I love that line. Hands down, one of my favorite lines in this book. And I think it's so similar to Aelin's you do not yield. Very similar in the one-liners that both are trying to embody. You do not yield, you bow to no one. So we walk into a Rivendell style meeting right out of the Lord of the Rings. That's what it reminds me of every time that I read the High Lords meeting, because they step into a large room that is kind of open above, and it has a circle of large chairs, only instead of having a table in the center, it has a reflecting pool. So very similar to the Fellowship meeting. Feyre does find out that there is a group of flying people in the Dawn Court, very similar to the Illyrian. They're called the Peregrine. We talked about it in last episode. Now we've gotten multiple names for the different types of flying fae throughout the series. Now we have Peregrines, and that they were a distant relation to Drake and Seraphim. And that Thesan, because of this, has a small aerial legion, not nearly as large as the Illyrians, but he does at least have a small aerial force. They walk in to where the other High Lords and their groups of people already are. They come up to Feyre and Rhysand because they walk in first. Everyone kind of bows around, so all of the extra people that are with the High Lords bow to each other. But Feyre does not bow. She specifically mentions that she stared down the High Lords that come up to her, that she simply stood and stared because she's at the same level. And I love that as she meets the different High Lords officially, she talks about the powers that she got from them and the good she's been able to do with those powers. So she meets Thesan first and mentions that the Dawn Court had the gift of healing and that she was able to save Rhysand's life because of that healing. And then she mentions in a couple of pages where she meets Helion, and his was the spell cleaver power that had gotten her friends out of Hybern. But I love this part because at that point, the not High Lady, but the wife of Callias, the Winter Court High Lord, his wife turns to Mor turns to her, and they both smile and squeal like little girls and go running over to each other. And I love this because the two of them crack me up through this whole meeting and this whole encounter before the meeting even starts. Because they run over, hug each other, are bouncing up and down, laughing, crying, so excited to see each other, telling each other you look the same, you've brought the same people with you. And Callias, as you can hear him say, I tried to suggest she stay home. She threatened to freeze my balls off. And Rhys is like, that sounds familiar. Because Feyre's definitely threatened to do something similar. And we find out that this is Vivienne, Callias's wife, that she is his wife as well as his mate. And she says, it still sounds strange to me to say white. Every time someone says it, I just think, I look over my shoulder for someone else. And Callias is like, she says this on a daily basis, and I can't decide if I should insult it or not. So I already love Callias because I feel like he's very similar to Rhysand. Very similar. He has a very strong-willed female as a wife, but he kind of lets her just walk all over him like Rhysand and Feyre. Because at one point, Vivienne sticks her tongue out at him. And I'm just like, yeah, Feyre has definitely done this. Vivienne does turn to Feyre and thanks her for returning Callias, her mate, to her. And Mor is like, mate, you're married and you're mate. Rhysand's immediate response is, you two do realize that this is a serious meeting. And Callie says, and the fish in the pool are very sensitive to high-pitched squeal. Which is what I mean. It's so perfect because they feed off of each other. Then we get a little bit of backstory on Callias and Vivienne. And honestly, this is a book I would enjoy reading. So I feel like if Sarah ever wanted to write like a novella on their story, I would be totally there for it. We find out that Vivienne and Callias were childhood friends, but he secretly loved her as they grew up. And it wasn't until Amarantha came that he used the last bits of his power to reach out to Vivienne, tell her that he loved her, and to ask her to protect what city she currently lived in and the castle she was in. So for the 50 years that Amarantha ruled, Vivienne in secret, ruled or kind of led his army and protected that one area that she was in. When the day he returned home, he winnowed right to her. She completely jumped him, kissed him as soon as he walked in, didn't even let him say anything. And he immediately asks her to marry him, to be his wife. They go to the temple, swear their vows. And I love it because at this point, this is Mor and Vivienne gossiping to each other. And Vivienne says, and then that night, during the you-know-what, the bond snapped into place. And Mor is like, oh yeah? The you-know-what? Give me more details on the you-know-what, because she's such a girl. This is such a girl thing to do. And it cracks me up because Mor wanted details, lots of them, ones that pushed the boundaries of propriety and left Thiessen choking on his wine and Callias smiling at his wife. I love it. I love it because it's such a, like, it's just two typical girls wanting to chit chat and catch up with each other. Feyre, while looking at Helion, Helion finally approaches her. And she gives us a little bit of information on something that happened prior to her family losing their wealth. That her father had once bought and traded a gold lapis lazuli pendant that hailed from the ruins of an arid southeastern kingdom where the Fae had ruled as gods amid swaying date palms and sand-swept palaces. Sounds a lot like a certain city in Throne of Glass, certain kingdom in Throne of Glass. The southern continent. The city of gods is literally what that city is called, Antica. Antica is called the city of gods. That's what it translates to. So I think it's interesting that Feyre mentions her father had actually traded for a pendant from a southern kingdom that was sand-swept. Sounds very similar to Antica. But she does describe Helion as he walks up, sun personified, power, lazy with grace, capable of kindness and wrath, nearly as beautiful as Rhysand, but somehow colder than Callias. So we do find out in a couple of chapters that Helion is also kind of wearing a mask, where the Night Court has chosen to remove those masks. Helion, he doesn't know that. He doesn't find out until later on that evening, but Helion is still wearing his mask. That's why he seems so cold to Feyre. But this is Helion, Spellcleaver, and she realizes that he is a large, muscular Fae, very big. She realizes that was all a mask. Even his strength and his finesse was all a mask to hide or to draw attention away from his mind and the amount of knowledge that he holds within it. Because she talks about him having the day court has 1,000 libraries were rumored to contain the knowledge of the world. Perhaps all that knowledge had made him too aware. So it makes me wonder what all he knows, if he has that much knowledge or that many libraries. They do, of course, talk a little bit about Feyre being High Lady. Helion asks if Tamlin knows, but he specifically says, does Tamlin know what she is? And Rhys's response is, you mean that she's beautiful, clever? Then yes, I think he does. And Helion is just like, no. Does he know she's your mate and High Lady? And Vivienne squeaks from the other side of the room, High Lady? I'm just a wife. But Rhys says if he arrives, then I suppose we'll find out. And Helion's response is to just laugh. I always liked you, Rhys. And then they notice Nesta, all three High Lords. She mentions that Helion's attention kind of snags on Nesta and then lingers. And he asks, who is your guest? Feyre says she is my sister and our emissary of the human lands, and she'll tell her story when everyone is here. And then one of them says, well, she's Fae. And Vivienne's like, yeah, no crap, dude. We all can see this. Mor snorts and Callias raises his eyebrows at them, but Helion just ignores them. So finally, Thiessen asks who made her. Nesta looks them all down, surveys all the High Lords, and says Hybern did. And then Feyre steps in and says they threw her into a cauldron along with my other sister. And then she goes on to say, and she mentions she says it without an inch of manners or niceness or flattery. It's after the High Priestess Ianthe and Tamlin sold out Prythian and my family to them. So she makes a very heavy accusation, which Helion points out. And Feyre says this is no accusation. We were all there, and now we're going to do something about it. And Vivienne murmurs to Callias, why can't I be High Lady? Which I hope we get more of Vivienne at some point down the road. I think I like her character. At that point, Tarquin shows up. He is an hour late. Most of the others have taken their seats, so they're all seated around the pool. And when Tarquin and his entourage come in, he has Varian and Cressida flanking. And I think it's funny, we don't actually get an interaction, but when Varian walks in, he notices Cassian and just kind of growls at him or glowers at him. And Cassian just gives him a cocky grin because we don't know what actually happened when Cassian visited the summer court. We just know he is banned. He's not allowed to go back. He destroyed a building and now he's not allowed to go. We do finally get the Autumn Court arriving as well. So it is the High Lord of Autumn, Baron, Eris, his oldest son, and then the other 3 remaining sons. We know Lucian, of course, is on the continent, so he's not there. But also Lucian's mother, the Lady of the Autumn Court, has also come. And Feyre watching Lucian's mother walk in, that she's scanning the room, and Feyre thinks it's as if she's looking for her missing son. And then she notices that the lady's eyes fall on Helion instead, who gives her a mocking incline of his dark head, and she quickly averts her gaze. We're going to find out later on there's a little something that happened on between this. Everyone sits down. There are no seats left because Tamlin did not say he was coming or not. So they are at this point assuming Tamlin's not going to show. So everyone has come except for Tamlin. Thiessen gets up as the host to say, Rhysand, you called this meeting, pushed us to gather sooner than anticipated. Now would be a good time to explain what the meeting's about. And Rhys is like, well, surely the invading armies landing on our shores explain it. So Helion asks, you've called us together to do what exactly? To raise a unified army. And Rhys says, among other things, yes. But before he is able to continue speaking, he is cut off. And Feyre describes it as almost the same entrance as how Tamlin entered her cottage, her family's hovel, in book 1. When the door had shattered and a beast had charged in with freezing cold and roared at us. Like a crack of lightning, vicious in a spring storm, Tamlin winnowed into the chamber himself and smiled like a... Darn you, Tamlin! Okay, so Tamlin winnows in, doesn't stop at the balcony where everyone was supposed to winnow to, doesn't bother being greeted, he winnows directly in. I think it's interesting throughout this entire encounter that there is utter stillness, complete silence as soon as he gets there. And Feyre mentions that a tremor of magic slid through the room as shield after shield locked into place around each High Lord. So, prior to Tamlin getting there, they don't have shields up. But Tamlin gets there, and now they all put up shields. That just speaks to the relationship Tamlin had. Tamlin is a total butthole through this first couple of paragraphs, through this first section of the meeting. Complete and total butthole to the point where, he doesn't care about the meeting. He doesn't care about talking about war. He is there to undermine the Night Court. And because he is in, the hatred part of the breakup phase. He's moved past denial, and now he is at hatred towards Feyre and Rhysand to a crazy extent. He just looks at him with utter loathing, complete scathing in his eyes. Everyone is surprised he's there, that he actually showed up. They actually had to haul another chair in because they didn't have an extra chair for him. And it is just him. He does not have anyone with him. And then we have some, I don't want to call it banter, because banter to me is like nice, or at least fun. And this is not fun, and it is not nice whatsoever. He does congratulate Feyre and Reed, but that's about the only nice thing that he actually says. And he doesn't say it nicely. It's more of a, everyone's bracing for whatever he's going to say first. And he starts with, no. Rhysand turns to Thesan and says, we'll continue this discussion later, because at this point everyone still thinks Tamlin is working with Hybern. And Tamlin says, well, don't stop on my account. And Rhys says, well, I'm not in the business of discussing our plans with enemies. And Helion just grins like a lion because they're all loving this, like they love it at the beginning, all of this crap going back and forth between Tamlin and Rhys and Feyre, but it gets tedious. And they start to get annoyed by Tamlin because this is all he cares about right now. He's not interested in being the bigger person. He's not interested in moving forward. He is just interested in shredding Feyre's integrity and her character. He mentioned, if Rhys hadn't stolen my bride away in the night, I wouldn't have been forced to take such drastic measures to get her back. Feyre responds with, well, the sun was still shining when I left. Callias asks at one point, why are you here, Tamlin? He gives us some BS about he bartered his lands for the woman that he loved, only for her to be, turned to the sadist that killed my family, for her to run back to her master after she pulled, the wool over our eyes, after she makes my court fall from within. And Feyre's response is, you don't get to rewrite the narrative and spin this to your advantage. You're not the good guy or the victim in this story. And Tamlin ignores her, completely ignores her, which he knows is going to be the thing that pisses her off the most. And he starts to taunt them, saying things like, or did you notice when you're sleeping with her, does she do this like she did with me? Kind of comment. And Feyre realizes that this wasn't outright battle, but a steady, careful shredding of my dignity and my credibility. And I love that it's not Rhysand that stands up for her at this point. It's Asriel. He says, be careful how you speak of my high lady. But Tamlin does not learn. We've seen that in the last 2.5 books. He doesn't learn at all. So he continues talking crap, says, why serve in my court when you can rule in his? So at this point, Tamlin has realized that she is actually High Lady of the Night Court, which is something he was not willing to give. And says they peddle tales of defending our land and peace, and yet she came into my lands and destroyed them from within. Don't listen to them, because Rhys sided with Amarantha under the mountain. He's most likely already sided with Hybern. Yes, we might join them now. Best the king of Hybern, and then we will end up with a king and queen of Prythian, because we've already seen what Feyre's intentions are. And she's already proved she has the ambition to get to that level. And total bullcrap, Tamlin. And I love Rhysand's response, though, because he doesn't say anything back to dispute him. He's just like, well played, Tamlin. You're learning. You're finally joining the big kids table. And it makes me laugh because Tamlin is just furious at that response from Rhysand. Then he tries to undermine their relationship with the Winter Court, because during Amarantha's rule, there were multiple Winter Court children that were killed, and Amarantha did it because Rhysand tried to stop her from killing Callias. He succeeded in stopping her from killing Callias, but in retaliation, then Amarantha kills multiple children and uses Damati to do it. So it looks like it was actually Rhysand who did it. So Tamlin is bringing that up, trying to undermine the relationship between the Winter and the Night. Rhysand does explain all of that to them. But I think it's really interesting that all of the points Tamlin is bringing up are things the King of Hybern or Amarantha did that he's choosing to blame on Feyre and Rhysand, which is just ridiculous. Like, they made those choices. Rhysand and Feyre didn't do that. That was Amarantha and the King of Hybern's choices. They're not going to take blame, nor should they take blame, for other people's choices. Baron does not keep his mouth shut either. No, he doesn't learn it all either. He brings up Claire and how Feyre gave Claire's name and got Claire and her entire family butchered. So how can she speak in regards to peace and keeping others safe when she was so willing to give up another to keep her life? So it's kind of Baron and Tamlin against Rhysand, throwing insults at him about sleeping with Amarantha, being Amarantha's whore. One of them at some point even says, well, maybe it's fitting we're Amarantha's whore for so long. It's fitting that Feyre would be your whore in return. Eris at one point tries to reprimand his father. His father's not having that. He's still just going to continue to throw insults. Again, Callias asks Tamlin why you're here, because the other High Lords have gotten to a point where this is getting tedious. They don't care about the issues between the Spring Court and the Night Court. They want to move forward with what they're going to do to help stop Hybern. So they're trying to kind of bring it back to that and keep Tamlin and Baron from just going down this list of insults. And Tamlin's response is, I am here to help you fight against Hybern. Or no one believes him. Thiessen even says, you'll forgive us if we're doubtful and are hesitant to share our plan. Tamlin's response was, well, are you doubtful even if I have information on how? And Tamlin goes into a steps that's why he invited them into his lands, why he was willing to make a bargain, was so that he could get close to the king, learn what he wanted to do, and then feed that information to the other High Lords so that they could defeat Hybern. That Tamlin planned to get out of his bargain with the king in regards to getting Feyre back. He just wasn't sure how to do it, but it was something he planned to do to protect his court and his people and Prythian. Helion even says at one point, you're beginning to become tedious, Tamlin. Take your lover's spat elsewhere and let the rest of us discuss war. Like, it's such a childish thing for Tamlin to continually bring up his issues with them and not let them move forward with the discussion. Callias asks him a third time why he is there, and his response is, I stand against Hybern. Helion asks him to prove it, so he drops a ton, like a stack of papers that have charts of armies, ammunition, caches of Fabane, everything that he's gleaned over the last couple of months. And Helion's response is, well, that's great, but how do we know that this is the truth and that you're not feeding us lies so you can take this information back to Hybern? And Tamlin says, well, who's to say that Rhysand and his cronies aren't agents of Hybern and that you're just yielding to them? Just like you would to Hybern. And Nesta's response is, you can't be serious. Like, Nesta has had it. She is done with all of the back and forth. She has had it. And Thiessen adds, before Nesta can say anything else, if you need to ally against Hybern, you're doing a good job of convincing us not to band together. And then Tamlin brings up, oh, well, now the Night Court wants allegiance. They're pretending to be the ones who are trying to save us. They're the ones who went to save the Summer Court when Hybern attacked them. How do we know, that they didn't work with Hybern to set up the attack to begin with? And Varian says, well, they know because I sent word, which Tarquin didn't know. So now he's learned why Rhysand and them actually. And Tamlin's response was, then maybe you're working with the King of Hybern as well. And it's just like, the more stuff he spews out of his mouth just gets more and more ridiculous. To the point where Feyre even says, this is ridiculous. You're insane, Tamlin. My sisters were turned into Fae by Hybern because your priestess sold them out. And Tamlin's like, well, perhaps Ianthe's mind was already in Rhysand's thrall. What kind of bullcrap is that? And then he goes to say, and what a tragedy to remain young and immortal forever. You're a good actress, Feyre, so it's a trait that probably runs in the family. Like, I just want to punch him in the face so badly. So badly. Like, all of that consideration and understanding we were trying to give him through the first book and even into the second book, like, it's gone. It is gone. I'm done trying to understand Tamlin at this point. I just want to punch him in the face. And that's to the point, that's where Nesta is at as well. She says, if you want someone to blame for all of this, you should start by looking in the mirror. Yes. Thank you, Nesta. And then Cassian snarls at Tamlin to watch his words towards Nesta. And then Tamlin's response right after that is, well, it seems like there are other preferences that run in the Archeron family too, because Nesta and Cassian might be a thing. And Feyre gets frustrated, asks, what do you want? Do you want an apology? Do you want me to crawl back to your bed and play nice little wife? And Tamlin says, no, why would I want spoiled goods returned to me? The moment you let him, and then he gets cut off, he's starting to talk about the moment that you slept with Rhysand, and then he stops talking. Not because he chooses to, because he can't continue to talk. Vane simply stopped emitting sounds. He shut his mouth, opened it, and tried again. And Rhysand says, the gasping fish look is not a good one for you, Tim. And then this is when the rest of them realize that Rhysand has used his power to stop Tamlin from speaking. And they realize that, yes, Rhysand is a High Lord just like them, but he is so much more powerful than them that he was as different from them as humans were to Feyre. And Feyre says, and they forgot it sometimes, how deep that well of power went. But as Rhysand ripped away Tamlin's ability to speak, they remember. I just love it. Because finally, Rhysand just like, nope, I'm done. And he just cuts. Rhysand says, if you want proof that we are not scheming with Hybern, consider the fact that it would be far less time-consuming to slice into your minds and make you do my... Tarquin steps in at this point because it's still silent and says, despite Varian's unsanctioned warning, you are still the only ones who came to help. And yet you asked for nothing in return. Why? And Rhysand says, isn't that what friends do? And Tarquin then rescinds the blood rubies. Let there be no debts between. Cassian mutters, don't expect Amren to give hers back. She's grown attached to it. To which Varian smiles because he knows it's because of... But what I love about this next part is Rhysand then chooses to be the better man, the better male through all of this. And he turns to Tamlin and actually says, I believe you that you will fight for Prythian. The other High Lords aren't necessarily convinced, but Rhysand is taking the high road and says, war is upon us. I have no interest in wasting energy arguing amongst ourselves. All of it was a careful portrayal of reason and power. Even if Tamlin had been a part of killing Rhys's own family, even if he had played his part in Hybern, for our home for Prythian, he'd set it all aside and sacrifice the only sacrifice that would harm no one but his own. And then Baron and Eris decide to open their mouths because they didn't learn from Rhysand shutting Tamlin's a minute ago. Okay, so it's Eris that actually says to Mor that she still dresses like a slut. To which Azriel is not interested in hearing him speak or live anymore, to be honest. One moment Azriel was seated, the next he'd blasted through Eris's shield with a flare of blue light. I think this little interaction is really interesting because Rhys twice tells Azriel to stop, says it's but Azriel is still squeezing. Eris is thrashing beneath. Rhys says again, enough, Azriel. And Azriel doesn't listen. So Rhys actually turns to Feyre in an invitation for her to take that step as High Lady. So she gets up, walks over to Azriel, puts a hand on his shield because she shielded himself with Eris and himself inside. And so she puts a hand on his shield and says, come, Azriel. Azriel stops. And eventually he does get up and take her hand. And so he sits beside her. Nesda moves over, and Feyre actually goes and gets him a glass of wine and brings it over. And they all kind of raise their brows at her as to why the High Lady is serving someone below her. And her response is, they are my family. But she does turn to the High Lord of Autumn and say, that's twice now that we've kicked your butts. I'd think you'd be sick of the humiliation. But he still has not learned, which we're going to find out in a minute. But I love this part because once Feyre and Azriel actually get settled, it is Helion who turns to his entourage and says, you owe me 10 gold marks, because he and his entourage also bet on somebody fighting within a certain amount of time at the High Lord's. Then they do get back to discussing the war. Helion goes through the papers that Tamlin has brought. He creates replicas of them to give to everybody. But then Helion goes through them and says, I suggest two things. First, destroying Hybern's caches of Faebane, because they're not going to last long if Hybern is using the Faebane against their powers. Tarquin does volunteer for the summer court to handle it because they have a score to settle, and Thesan says there's no need. So Thesan actually has a master tinkerer come out, and this is Nuon. Nuon is the one who created Lucian's eye, the metal eye that he has. She also has a metal hand of her own because her hand was cut off. But I think what's really interesting about this female is that Feyre mentions she looks exactly like Amren. Like, the only thing different is their eyes, and that's because Amren herself has said that's the only part of her that couldn't contain, and so it's her power, who she used to be, shines through her eyes. But Feyre mentions that her face is so similar to Amren's that she wonders if Amren had modeled her own features after a similar bloodline when she'd bound herself in her fable. I don't know if that means anything, but I thought it was interesting, because I haven't picked up on that, or that Amren looks just like this Master Tinker. We do also find out that Nuon has created an antidote that grants immunity to the Faebane, and it is a powder that they can put in their food and drink it, just like the Faebane that Feyre took when she was in the spring that Ianthe was giving. It will stop the Faebane from nullifying their power, and that she actually got samples from Valaris to create this antidote, and we find out that it is Lucian who got her those samples. That's why he was so eager to go out in Valaris, not with Feyre, so that he could get those samples and send them back to New. So, just another little point to show us that Lucian is still kind of that conniving fox, and he was still doing things while in the Night Court that we didn't know.
Which also it also gave you medium feasibility for that theory we talked about last episode. Because now that because even his favorite clicks together and goes, oh, that's why he wanted to be out and about that. Well, he can winnow, Lucian and Tamlin can winnow just as well as a brand new favorite could winnow, and she was winnowing just fine. So, I don't know.
We don't know
I didn't
for
put a lot of
sure.
thought back into it, but I kind of went back over it after reading that.
Yes. I think it's interesting because Nuon, they want to know how she came up with an antidote. And she specifically says, the mother has provided us with everything we need on this earth. So it has been a matter of finding what exactly she gave us in Prythian to combat a material from Hybern capable of wiping out our powers. So I think it's interesting that Hybern found this method that nullified their powers, but then another Fae was able to find an antidote to give them immunity. Thesan tells us that he already has multiple cities manufacturing this powder. So this is kind of where I talked a little bit about this new theory that I saw, that ACOWAR comes first and Crescent City comes second in this world. And it kind of starts to hint at it as we get glimpses of the Dawn Court. Because we don't have machinery or mechanics in any other court that we've seen other than in the Dawn with the hand that Nuon has. It is a metallic hand, just like the eye that Lucian has. And now Thesan is talking about cities that have manufacturing plants where they can manufacture this. I mean, we don't know to what extent their technology is, but there is some sort of science and technology that they actually have in Dawn Court that isn't in the other courts. Multiple people agree. Resend out my army and I will take it, yada yada. Baron, being the butthole that Baron is, we see why Baron is higher on Resand's crap list than Tamlin is, because he is just a total butthole. Like, worse than Tamlin level butthole. Eris says he will take it, and Baron's response is, no, you won't. Neither will your son. And Feyre mentions that she wonders, she's starting to see more of Eris. And we talked about this at the meeting with Eris a couple chapters ago. But Feyre is now wondering if Eris might have grown to be a good male if he had a different father, and that somewhere lurking inside him, beneath centuries of poison, there was still good, still something in him that could become. And like I said, Rhys says, I will take it, my armies will take it, my people will take it. And Tamlin decides at that point he needs to chime in again and say, well, if I had an army, then I'd have them take it, but I don't have an army anymore. Thanks.
Alright.
Like, even after the talk changed, got away from Tamlin and Rhysand and Feyre, Tamlin is still trying to bring it. And that's when Helion says, the second thing that I recommend is that the Spring Court be evacuated. We find out Tamlin taunts Feyre a little bit, says, those villages that you wanted to go help, they're gone. Hybern has wiped them, which I think, again, is interesting that Tamlin is blaming Hybern's choices on Feyre, because Feyre's next thought is, or Tamlin had said that the king agreed to leave their villages untouched. And it's Hybern that's gone back on their word and is doing the opposite, and yet Tamlin is blaming it on Feyre. So yes, they also want to evacuate the Spring Court. Baron says he will not take anyone from the Spring Court, that they don't have the resources for. Vivienne, I just love Vivienne so much. Vivienne says, right, because everyone's too busy polishing every jewel in that trove of yours to actually do something productive. To which Baron says, wives were invited as a courtesy, not as consults, which is total BS. And Vivienne literally says that. She says, if war goes poorly, we'll be bleeding outright alongside you. So I think we definitely get a say. And Baron starts to taunt her a little bit, saying a young pretty thing like you're definitely going to deal with some crap if Hybern gets a hold of you, and they're not just going to kill you. So we get hints in this part, and we're going to get them a little bit more as to something that happened with the Lady of Autumn Court, Baron's wife. We don't get a ton of details. We're going to get some in a couple of chapters. What Baron said is that the loyalists in Hybern that captured females in their war camp, they took them there to torment them, and, to physically destroy them. And Baron goes so far as to say his wife, her two sisters, bought her time to run when Hybern's forces ambushed their lands. The two ladies did not walk out of that war camp. And Helion, through what Baron is saying, is watching him closely. His simmering So it makes me wonder, before we get any more details from Helion in a couple chapters, it makes me wonder what really happened, because it leads me to believe that Baron made decisions that led to Hybern coming in. And because of the decisions Baron made, her sisters are now dead. There's another more. Somebody tells Feyre that Baron made choices in the war that were both good and bad, but bad things came out of it. And it makes me wonder if this is one of those choices. We don't find out for sure, but just the way that things are worded, it makes me wonder if it's actually Baron's fault that her sisters. Tarquin says, regardless of Tamlin's involvement with Hybern, his people are innocent, and there are plenty of room in the Summer Court for them, so he is willing to take all of the Spring Court in the Summer. And then they bring up the humans. Who is going to protect the humans below the wall? Baron, of course, says, well, I don't care. They're human. We don't owe them any. Nesta chimes in and says the queen sold us out for the gift of immortality. The human queens will allow Hybern to sweep in without resistance. They might very well hand over control to him entirely. That's when Baron says, well, the fate of the humans below the wall is not our concern. We don't care. And Feyre says, well, it is my concern. Humans are nearly defenseless against our kind. And this is the first time she's actually using the wording correctly, saying our kind as in the. Baron says, you can go waste your soldiers protecting them, but I'm not going. He and Feyre kind of have a little back and forth. Rhys is trying to calm her down through the bonds as Baron is kind of riling her. Baron does tell them that he hasn't decided if he's going to join the fight or not. He hasn't decided yet, and Cassian's response is, well, you need to decide because armies take time to raise, and you need to rally your soldiers now so that we can get them prepared and ready for wherever the next battle is going. Baron's response is to sneer at Cassian because he doesn't take orders from bastards, to which Nesda responds because she's the one now who's going to defend Cassian. And she says that bastard may wind up being the only person standing in the way of Hybern's forces and your people. Baron, like I said, then tries to continue to taunt Feyre, talk about things that happened under the mountain, talking about Rhysand and everything that he sacrificed with Amarantha, but Baron is turning it around that he actually joined with Amarantha, that he wanted it, wanted to be her whore. And it is odd that he wants to now play hero when he was willing to follow Amarantha. And he starts to talk about, since he was with Amarantha, is he then also going to be with the king if the king takes over, that kind of. And Feyre can't take anymore. She is done. She is so worked up that she stopped hearing anything other than her heartbeat and her breathing. Fire exploded out of me, white hot flame that blasted into Bigaish like a. Rhys is talking to Feyre or yelling at her. She's not quite sure if he's screaming down the bond or screaming out loud. But after she sends the water to him, then she sends a wave of water from the reflection pool to encase and encircle Baron and his chair, a bubble without. And then she punches white light into the fiery sheet, the white light of day, spell cleaver, spell breaker, ward cleaver. And then it's at that point that Baron's shields start to fray, and finally Rhysand steps in front of Feyre, grabs her face, and says, "You've proved your point. If you kill him, then horrible Eris will take his place." And Feyre's response is, "Then I'll kill him." And Rhys says, as interesting as an experiment as that would be, it would only complicate matters. And this is where he does the same thing that she's done to him by whispering or saying into the bond, "I love you. I see you." The words of that hateful man are nothing. He is nothing because he has no joy in his life where we do. We have and now all the High Lords realize that Feyre has a little bit of their power. Not a whole lot, but a little. Because Tarquin realizes it first. He says, "So that's how you got through my wards," because she has a little bit of his power. And then Helion says, "I wondered where it went. That little bit, so small, like a fish missing a single scale, but I still felt whenever something brushed against that empty spot." And then he turns to Rhys and says, "No wonder you made her High." And Rhys says, "Well, no, I made her High Lady because I loved her. Her power was the last thing I considered." And then Helion turns to Tamlin and asks Tamlin if he knew she had powers. And Tamlin's response, "It was none of your business." Oh, good grief, Tamlin. I'm just not even going to get into it with Tamlin anymore. Because I can't actually punch him in the... Then, right? Then, of course, Bear still has not learned his lesson. You idiot! Then he says the power belongs to us. So I think it does. It is our business. Everyone at this point is ignoring Baron. Feyre realizes that the Lady of Autumn Court was burned when she shot her power at Baron, because when Baron shielded, the fire went around him and got the people on either side, which was Eris and the mother. To which Baron, of course, says, "Don't talk to her, you human." And then, Rhys just, holds him up, and his chair turns to mist, so he falls back on his... And he shoots to his feet and says, "This meeting is over. I hope Hybern butchers you all." And Nesda stands up and says, "This meeting is not over." And there's enough power in her voice that Baron actually... And everyone is sizing her up. And you are all there is between Hybern and the end of everything that is good and decent. You fought against Hybern in the last war, refused to do so now. He doesn't answer. So Nesda goes on and says, you may hate us. I don't care if you do, but I do care if you let innocents suffer and die. At least stand for them, your people, for Hybern will make an example of them, of all of us. And Beren asks how she knows this, and Nesda says, I went into the cauldron. It showed me his and he will bring down the wall and butcher those on either side of it. And Feyre thinks to herself, I wasn't sure if this was truth or lie, if Nesta was just just lying to make a point, or if the cauldron had actually shown her. But then she turns to Callias and Vivienne and says, I'm sorry for the loss of those children. The loss of one is abhorrent. But beneath the wall, I witnessed children and entire families starve to death. Were it not for my sister, I would be among. For too long, humans beneath the wall have suffered and died, while you and Prythian thrive. If you fight for anything, fight now to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to protect those you forgot, and let them know they are not forgotten. Thesan, of course, says, a noble sentiment, but the treaty did not state that we had to provide for our human neighbors. They were to be left alone, so we obeyed. And Nesda's response is, that was the past. What I care about is the road and making sure that no children, human or fae, are harmed. You have been entrusted with protecting this land. How can you not fight? So Beren at least says, I will consider before he and the rest of the Autumn Court went. Callias then turns to Feyre and asks, did you master the ice? And her response is, I mastered all. And Rhys and Feyre talk a little bit back in their bond, that the possibility of the alliance unraveling quickly is happening now. But Rhys says it either would have happened now or with something else. Better now than. So Tarquin says, you saved us under the mountain. Losing a kernel of our power seems a worthy pain. And Helion says, well, it seems like she took more than. If she could be within seconds of drowning Beren despite his words. And she mentions that Helion kind of sends his power out to test hers a little bit, to brush up against, as if testing if there is a tether between the two. And Thesan says, what's done is done. Short of killing her, there's nothing else we can do. And that's when Feyre realizes that if Rhysand wasn't in the picture, there's a good chance Thesan and possibly a couple other High Lords would want to kill her to find out where their power went, and in an attempt to get it. So Feyre then steps up, just like Nesta did, and says, I did not take your power. You gave it to me, along with the gift of my immortal life. I am grateful for both, but they are mine now, and I will do with them what I will. I will use the powers, my powers, to smash Hybern. I will burn them, drown them, and freeze them. I will use these powers to heal the injured, to shadow through Hybern's wards. I have done so already, and I will do it again. And if you think that my possession of a kernel of your magic is your biggest problem, then your priorities are severely out of. And I love that it is the women in this room that stand up with Nesta and Feyre. Because then Vivienne nods and rises and says, I will stand with you. I will fight with you. And then Cressida, who didn't like Feyre, from what we gathered in book 2 at the Summer Court, Cressida stands and says, so will. And then they look to the males in their own courts as if, I'm standing now, you better get your butt up and stand for them as well. So then, of course, Tarquin and Callias do as well. Helion does too. And then Thesan and Tamlin, as Rhys says, well, 6 out of 7. That's not bad, Cursebreaker. Not bad. Which I think is interesting because Feyre feels like so often the tasks she's given, now that she is with Rhysand, she doesn't actually do. Like, she was tasked to nullify the cauldron. That didn't work. She was tasked to bring the human queens around to the Night Court's point of view. She wasn't able to do that. So it was like almost every task that Rhys threw at her in book 2, she wasn't able to accomplish. That was very disheartening for her. And now she's gotten to a point, she has the courage to step up and do it a little bit more. Not that she didn't have the courage before, but she is willing to fight even more than she was in the past, and has now gotten to a point where she brought down the Spring Court like she wanted to. Now she has learned how to an extent like she wanted. she also fought in the Summer Court. She brought Nesda to join them, which we all thought was never going to happen. And now she has brought 6 of the 7 High Lords to their side. So then we will stop. All right. That means anything else that we want to bring up for that set of chapters other than Tamlin? What a butthole, Tamlin. Like, get over your nonsense and your crap. Get over the fact that she doesn't want to be with you anymore. You're not some little baby victim throughout all of this. You had a part to play. Own up to it and move on, dude. Just, right? That's all he does is,
Well, you did this and you did this. No, you were desperate and you would have given up your land to have her. You would have given anything to have her back. As
there's
a possession,
no,
not as a.
exactly. Well, and there's no ownership of actions, his actions, and his responsibility in everything that happened. 0. He doesn't believe he has ever done anything. Which I'm
Such
just like, how do you not?
the smallest bit of self-awareness in him. Like, I don't even need full reflection. Dude,
Just apologize for something.
that concludes our deep dive. Most chaotic diplomatic meeting Prythian has ever seen. Somehow, the High Lords managed to make a summit about saving the world feel like a centuries-long group therapy, complete with insults, old grudges, unexpected alliances, and just enough progress to keep everybody from storming out. I don't know. Looks like it ended pretty decently, but we'll see what the aftermath is next. Give us a share, a like, drop any comments on any theories you have. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining.